I can't handle that.
Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were two of the most iconic entertainers of their era, captivating audiences with a blend of comedy, charisma, and chemistry that seemed almost impossible to replicate. While both men would later go on to enjoy highly successful solo careers, there was a time when their names were nearly inseparable. Together, they became the biggest comedy duo in America, dominating nightclubs, radio, television, and Hollywood itself. But behind the laughter and applause, tensions were quietly growing. After a decade of extraordinary success, everything suddenly unraveled, leaving behind one of entertainment history's most heartbreaking and permanent divides. Join us as Facts Verse presents Dean Martin confirms why Martin and Lewis broke up forever, how they got together.
And we literally grew up with so many people that were obsessed with, how dare you break up? You're screwing up my life.
The story of Martin and Lewis began long before they officially teamed up. Their paths first crossed while performing separately at a New York City nightclub known as the Glass Hat. At the time, Jerry Lewis was entertaining audiences with his energetic lip-sync comedy routines, filled with exaggerated movements and wild humor. Dean Martin, by contrast, was the picture of effortless, cool, charming audiences with his smooth singing voice and relaxed confidence. Lewis immediately took notice. He admired Martin's rich vocals, but what impressed him just as much was the singer's calm, stylish presence. Dean had a natural magnetism that stood in complete contrast to Jerry's frantic stage energy. Then, fate intervened once again. One evening in 1946, the two performers found themselves appearing on the same bill at the Havana Madrid nightclub. Jerry remained fascinated by Martin's act and, after the show ended, decided to introduce himself. What followed was the beginning of something neither man could have predicted. The two connected almost instantly. After the club closed that night, they stayed behind, talking, joking, and bouncing ideas off one another. They began improvising possible comedy routines and sketching out scenarios that might work if they ever performed together. The chemistry was undeniable. Although they parted ways afterward, they stayed in touch.
You recognize there's not a lot of time left. I don't like that part. I don't like that part at all.
Soon, opportunity arrived unexpectedly. When another act dropped out at Atlantic City's famous 500 Club, Lewis convinced the club's manager to give Martin a chance to step in. Dean agreed, performing his usual singing set before joining Jerry on stage for something entirely new. Together, they tested some of the comedy material they had first imagined back at the Havana Madrid. The reaction was immediate. Audiences erupted with laughter and excitement. What Martin and Lewis had stumbled upon was more than a simple act. It was lightning in a bottle. Recognizing the potential, the pair began refining their formula. Jerry embraced the role of the reckless clown, a whirlwind of chaos and physical comedy whose unpredictable antics kept audiences on edge. Dean became the perfect counterbalance, the smooth, composed, straight man who grounded the madness while also delivering romantic songs with effortless charm. Their contrast became their greatest strength. Years later, Lewis famously described the partnership in just 3 words: sexy and slapstick. Their initial success.
As I was embracing Dean, you were right over his shoulder. I'm thinking to myself, dear God, if Frank doesn't give me something to say, God, give me a line.
Martin and Lewis quickly built momentum performing throughout the New York City nightclub circuit, eventually securing prestigious engagements, including a residency at the legendary Copacabana. Their stage performances became increasingly popular, drawing larger crowds eager to witness their unusual but irresistible chemistry. Success on stage soon opened new doors. The duo moved into radio, where their personalities translated perfectly to the medium. Their popularity there led naturally into television appearances, which only expanded their audience even further and boosted their radio fame at the same time. In 1948, Martin and Lewis achieved a remarkable milestone when they appeared on the very first broadcast of the program that would later become the legendary Ed Sullivan Show, though it was still called Toast of the Town at the time. Their star continued rising, and by 1949 they had secured their own NBC radio program, which remained on the air until 1953. But perhaps no part of their career proved bigger than Hollywood. Riding the wave of success from their stage performances, television exposure, and radio popularity, Martin and Lewis signed a movie deal that would turn them into full-fledged film stars. What followed was an impressive run of 17 highly successful movies that cemented their place in entertainment history. Among these films were favorites such as My Friend Irma, At War with the Army, That's My Boy, Jumping Jacks, and Money from Home. Many of the storylines followed familiar emotional patterns. Martin and Lewis often portrayed inseparable friends whose bond was eventually tested or broken by conflict.
I was figuring on going back to dealing blackjack, back to my old job, dealing.
Frequently, Dean's character played the charming womanizer whose actions triggered the fallout. For audiences, the formula worked beautifully. What few realized at the time, however, was that the stories unfolding on screen would eventually begin reflecting troubling realities behind the scenes. As audiences watched Martin and Lewis on screen, they became accustomed to a familiar emotional journey. Their characters were often portrayed as inseparable friends whose relationship would be tested by betrayal, misunderstanding, or temptation. Tensions would rise, feelings would be hurt, and for a while it seemed the friendship might be lost forever. But by the final act, they always rediscovered what truly mattered. Friendship prevailed, forgiveness followed, and the pair reunited to overcome whatever obstacle had driven them apart. It was hardly a complicated formula. Yet audiences adored it. Movie after movie, fans packed theaters to watch the same emotional rhythm unfold, not because the stories were groundbreaking, but because Martin and Lewis brought something authentic to the screen.
It was like a gift from God because you had to say something under those circumstances.
Well, they must have watched my lips because I was saying that to you.
Their chemistry felt real, their timing felt effortless, and people genuinely believed in the bond they shared. Ironically, however, while their fictional friendships always found healing, real life was beginning to tell a far different story. Things fall apart. So where exactly did everything go wrong for one of Hollywood's most successful partnerships? Looking back, it might seem impossible that a duo enjoying such overwhelming fame and financial success would allow cracks to form between them. After all, Martin and Lewis had conquered nearly every corner of entertainment together. They dominated nightclubs, thrived on radio, succeeded on television, and became reliable box office stars. But success often brings its own complications. As so frequently happens in Hollywood, ambition began to reshape priorities. And Jerry Lewis was particularly vulnerable to that pull. Lewis was never content with simply remaining half of a successful comedy act. While he appreciated what Martin and Lewis had built, his vision for the future stretched much further.
Because when I left Jerry, I was more scared than he was, and nobody knew it.
He increasingly saw himself not merely as a performer, but as a creative force capable of shaping films from the ground up. He wanted more than applause, and he wanted influence. One major shift involved his growing fascination with filmmaking itself. Lewis became deeply interested in writing, producing, and directing projects of his own. Rather than merely performing material prepared by others, he wanted a stronger voice in determining how stories were told, how scenes were staged, and how characters developed. As that passion intensified, Lewis gradually began asserting more creative control over the films he and Martin were making together. But his ambitions extended beyond directing and production. He also began rethinking the very nature of the characters he portrayed. Jerry understood that his slapstick persona had made him famous. Audiences loved the frantic energy, exaggerated reactions, and unpredictable physical comedy that defined his performances. He could always rely on those qualities to generate laughs. But over time, Lewis began feeling that comedy alone was not enough. He wanted audiences to laugh at his characters, certainly, but he also wanted them to care about them. In his mind, his screen persona needed emotional depth. Lewis described the ideal character he envisioned as a lovable schnook, someone awkward and foolish, perhaps even chaotic, but fundamentally sympathetic and human. He started writing and performing his roles with more vulnerability, adding emotional layers that encouraged viewers to root for his characters rather than simply laugh at them. From a creative standpoint, this evolution made perfect sense, at least initially. A matter of ambition. On paper, Lewis's artistic growth should not have threatened the partnerships. After all, Dean Martin's role in their films had long followed a completely different formula. Dean usually played the smooth operator, charming, stylish, confident, and sometimes emotionally distant. His characters often appeared too cool to care, occasionally selfish, and not always particularly sensitive. That dynamic worked because Jerry's lovable innocence served as a moral counterweight. By the third act, Lewis's warm-hearted character typically helped Martin's tougher or more self-centered figure recognize his mistakes and change for the better. Audiences then embraced Dean's redemption, making the emotional payoff even stronger. In theory, making Jerry's roles more sympathetic should have enhanced that formula. But reality proved far more complicated. Dean Martin had quietly grown tired of playing the same type of character over and over again. While Jerry was expanding creatively, Dean increasingly felt trapped. He too wanted to explore more emotionally layered roles. He wanted characters with warmth, vulnerability, and heart, not merely the slick womanizer or detached straight man waiting to be redeemed at the end of the film. But as Lewis claimed greater ownership over the lovable side of their storytelling, Martin found himself increasingly boxed into the opposite role. The imbalance became harder to ignore. And when Jerry's creative authority expanded behind the scenes, Dean began recognizing a troubling pattern. These no longer felt like equal collaborations. Instead, Martin increasingly viewed them as Jerry Lewis pictures that simply happened to feature Martin and Lewis together. That realization bred frustration. Dean disliked that his characters often remained shallow and somewhat harsh until the final minutes of a movie, while Jerry received the richer emotional arcs and audience sympathy. The partnership that had once felt perfectly balanced was beginning to tilt heavily in one direction. At the same time, another important change was happening in Dean's life. His singing career was finally gaining serious momentum. Martin wanted to incorporate more musical performances into their films and showcase his vocal talents more prominently. But Lewis showed little enthusiasm for shifting focus toward musical material. The divide between their creative priorities continued widening. And despite what many later assumed, Dean insisted that jealousy was never the true issue. After the split, Martin would make it clear that professional envy had not driven him away from Jerry Lewis. The real problem, he suggested, ran much deeper than that. Dean Martin later made it clear that jealousy was never the force that destroyed Martin and Lewis. Despite rumors that followed them for decades, he insisted that professional envy had little to do with their collapse. From his perspective, the real problem was far simpler and far more painful. It was ambition. Dean believed Jerry Lewis's growing drive for control had fundamentally altered the partnership they once shared. Lewis's creative ambitions were expanding rapidly, and Martin increasingly felt that the duo was no longer operating as equals. To Dean, it seemed as though Jerry was gradually taking over the creative process and reshaping their films around his own vision. And that was something Martin simply could not accept. What had begun as a partnership built on chemistry and mutual opportunity had become strained by competing goals and growing resentment. Neither man necessarily viewed himself as the villain. Instead, both believed they were fighting for something important: Jerry for creative growth and artistic control, Dean for balance and respect within the partnership. Unfortunately, neither was willing to surrender. 20 years of silence. Martin and Lewis performed their final scheduled show together on July 25, 1956, at the famous Copacabana nightclub. The date carried enormous symbolism. It was exactly 10 years to the day since they had first stepped onto a stage together and discovered the chemistry that would change both of their lives forever. For audiences, the farewell carried an air of sadness and nostalgia. But few fully understood how final it truly would become. Many famous partnerships fracture while still maintaining occasional contact behind closed doors. That would not be the case here. The divide between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had grown too deep. Despite their dramatically different personalities, the two men shared one remarkably similar trait: stubbornness. Dean's cool exterior concealed a deeply prideful nature, while Jerry's fiery ambition often made compromise difficult. Neither wanted to be the first to reach out. Neither wanted to appear vulnerable or admit regret. And so silence took over. Days became months, months became years. Then years became decades. For 20 years, the two men barely spoke. It is entirely possible that the stalemate would have continued indefinitely had a third figure not intervened. That figure was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra steps in. In 1976, Jerry Lewis was hosting his annual Muscular Dystrophy Telethon, an event closely associated with his charitable work and public image. Unknown to Lewis, Sinatra had been quietly planning something extraordinary. As a close friend to both men, Sinatra believed the feud had lasted long enough. So he arranged an unexpected reunion. When Sinatra suddenly brought Dean Martin onto the telethon stage, Lewis appeared genuinely stunned. Audiences watched as the two former partners came face to face for the first time in decades. The moment carried enormous emotional weight, but it was also unmistakably awkward. Because neither man had expected the encounter, there was no preparation and no carefully planned reconciliation. Their interaction felt cautious and restrained, almost as though two strangers were attempting to navigate memories neither fully knew how to revisit. Sinatra had hoped that this surprise meeting would create a first step toward healing, allowing both men to reconcile without either needing to sacrifice pride. Sadly, it did not unfold that way. While audiences were fascinated, the reunion itself felt uncomfortable, not only for viewers, but for Martin and Lewis as well. The warmth people hoped to see never fully materialized, and afterward, little changed. Years later, in 1983, Lewis spoke with People magazine and was asked whether another reunion with Martin might ever happen. His answer was far from optimistic. Jerry admitted he doubted it. He pointed to the enormous differences between their lifestyles and careers, suggesting they had simply become too different over time. Yet beneath the pessimism lingered a complicated affection. Lewis added that if he discovered Martin standing outside that very moment, he would gladly jump on his neck. The comment carried an interesting dual meaning, part threat, part embrace, and perhaps a reflection of emotions Jerry himself still struggled to understand. Their second reunion. For years after the telethon, it appeared that Dean and Jerry would never truly reconnect. And for much of the late 1970s and early 1980s, that assumption proved correct. Then tragedy intervened. In 1987, Dean Martin suffered an unimaginable loss when his son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., died in a devastating plane crash. The grief was overwhelming, and in a surprising turn, Jerry Lewis attended the funeral. Under such heartbreaking circumstances, old grievances suddenly seemed smaller. Perhaps both men recognized that their decades-long feud had become an exhausting and unnecessary burden. Perhaps loss stripped away the pride that had kept them apart. Whatever the reason, Dean Paul's death created something neither fame nor public pressure had managed to achieve. It opened the door. At the funeral, Lewis offered comfort to a grieving father, and Martin, perhaps for the first time in years, allowed himself to feel the familiarity of an old friendship. The two reconciled. It was not a dramatic Hollywood ending. They did not return to the stage, they did not relaunch their partnership, and they never again became inseparable companions. But they did reconnect. From 1987 until Dean Martin's passing in 1995, the two maintained occasional contact, speaking from time to time and slowly rebuilding a measure of peace between them. And something even more unexpected followed. Lewis changes his perspective. After Dean Martin died in 1995, Jerry Lewis began speaking about him with noticeably greater warmth and respect. The bitterness that had once defined his public comments softened. This represented a remarkable shift. Gone were the harsher remarks and lingering hostility that had once shaped discussions about their breakup. Then, in 2002, Lewis spoke once again with People magazine and offered perhaps his most revealing reflection yet. This time, Jerry admitted something few expected to hear. He suggested that the breakup may very well have been his fault. Lewis acknowledged that while Dean often appeared unaffected by their estrangement, he now believed Martin had been carrying pain privately for years. Jerry admitted that he had failed to recognize that suffering sooner, and that realization weighed heavily on him. It was a striking confession. After decades of blame, distance, and silence, Lewis finally seemed to understand that the partnership had meant more to Dean than he once believed, and perhaps more to himself as well. The story of Martin and Lewis remains one of Hollywood's greatest partnerships and one of its saddest separations. Together, they made millions laugh. Apart, they spent years carrying wounds neither fully knew how to heal. But in the end, reconciliation, however imperfect, did come. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What is your favorite Martin and Lewis memory? Do you think their breakup was inevitable, or could things have ended differently? Let us know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories from Hollywood history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.